variables, just keeping his people on side as well and giving Trump a win. And then there's the other issue about just the regional constellation. Those of you who are watching as the hostages were being released into the hands of ICRC and then into Israel, take note also that Hamas is still, despite the fact that it's been damaged and decapitated, it's still relevant in Gaza as well. So take note of that. After 15 months, you haven't quite killed off Hamas as well.
Just on that point, just to come back very quickly, and I'm conscious of time. I mean, it may be in Netanyahu's advantage for Hamas to still be there as a counterpart, if you know what I'm saying, because the alternative is the Palestinian Authority. So,
the third, one hopeful element out of this, and I think is going to be crucial, you can't begin to think in a coherent way about the day after for Gaza politically without actually giving a lifeline to the Palestinian Authority in any guise. So I think that's an important point. But I also want to make two other points. There's a bigger picture here from Netanyahu as well, which is whether they can get the normalization track on the table with Saudi Arabia. But, Robin, there's a silent war taking place in parallel, and that's the West Bank. We give you Gaza, don't get in the way of the West Bank, and we continue to smash and grab. So that's the other agenda that complicates what's happening in Gaza. So I think it's worth understanding that the micro-political about the deal specifically, but also the regional context and what Netanyahu thinks he can gain from allowing this ceasefire, and then the bigger things that he wants at the same time as well. And they're quite significant, what he wants as well.
No, there's clearly, as you very importantly indicated, and we were discussing beforehand, a bigger political context for Netanyahu in particular, and one that this panel is not focused on, but is real beyond Gaza. Hashim, let me come to you next, if I may. Tom made the point just now that Gaza's gone from being a laboratory of war to being a laboratory of humanitarian innovation. It's going to need private money. All of these kinds of institutions are going to struggle to deliver it. Yours is a bank that actually has been known for financial innovation. You've had to innovate financially. You're connected beyond Palestine to a large diaspora through a lot of the work you're doing and the kind of financial reach that you have. And you have a very personal stake in the outcome here. How do you see what's possible, and in particular some of the help that we've heard is going to be needed here to be able to take the situation forward?
Okay, thanks. Pretty straightforward, right? So I think if I can start by, you mentioned that Bank of Palestine started its journey in 1960 in Gaza, and it's been through hell and back quite a few times. And the people in Gaza and the Palestinian people in the entire land have been through hell and back. And so our story is very representative of the Palestinian narrative. In fact, the bank was shut down just simply on its name, the Bank of Palestine, in 1967. That name was obviously problematic. And it kind of reflects the struggle that we've been through for just, basic freedom and self-determination. But I won't get into that because that requires a whole other session, I think. It's important to, however, put things into context of the 77 years that we've been struggling. And actually, the World Economic Forum has been, a long-standing partner in raising awareness and the alarm bells and bringing Palestinian Israelis and partners together to address, the elephants in the room, and to try to come up with initiatives to move things in a positive direction. And on both sides, we've been raising the alarm bells of this kind of kicking the can down the line, and the economic disparity. And I'm going to get into the economics and the banking and the business side of things. But you just can't have one side prospering economically and reaching $55,000 GDP per capita and having the lowest unemployment rates in the world and thriving and prospering when the other side are below poverty and very high unemployment. Now unemployment is in Gaza is at 90%, and in the West Bank I think it's around 50%, and so this disparity is something that, you know, the likes of the World Economic Forum under this umbrella, we've been trying to raise awareness on these alarming disparities, warning that there might be a blow-up at some point, right? So let's take some steps to address these issues. Let's bring in a development initiative. Let's bring in programs that could address some of these issues. But at the end of the day, if we don't get to the real issue, which is ending occupation and defining the borders of Israel and Palestine and everyone to live peacefully and get on with their development visions for each state, we'll be back into this. And I think you rightly addressed another elephant in the room. There might be a ceasefire in Gaza, but all I could see over the news yesterday, maybe it doesn't hit the mainstream news, but fires in the West Bank, you know, settlers, you know, setting villages and Palestinian houses on fire and farms, and it's just the West Bank is now on fire. So I don't want to be sitting here next year in Davos talking about the humanitarian situation in the West Bank after billions of dollars go into Gaza to rebuild Gaza. Now, just very quickly, you mentioned about the UN cash assistance, right? For decades, we've been working with all development partners in mobilizing, you know, cash assistance programs. We've been the first to innovate in the digital space. We've brought in international investors to help the bank not only remain resilient but grow. We've grown to, you know, we're one of the, you know, we've now 8 billion in assets, 50% of GDP. We've grown 100 branches all over the West Bank and Gaza. We're now in the UAE, in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi. We got a license in Cairo. We're expanding in Cairo. Obviously, the day after this war, Egypt's going to play a strategic role in the development of Gaza. So we've left no stone unturned in terms of providing the international aid organizations as a trusted, well-vetted, high-tech, you know, bulletproof platform, Bank of Palestine, to facilitate all this aid. I think beneficiaries, 500,000 a year, receive much needed cash assistance and other form of aid through their phones, digitally, etc. We have programs to support micro businesses and SMEs, and the role, of course, here in any recovery, to engage the private sector, from a micro business, the farmers, the fishermen, to companies that create jobs. I mean, I think, with all due respect, the UN can't do this job alone, and neither can any single humanitarian organization. I think the scale is so apocalyptic of Gaza, what's happened. 80% of Gaza has been decimated. You're talking about 2 million people displaced. I mean, it's 2.5% of the population has been killed, 50,000 people. The London Hygiene School of Hygiene, they estimate the number to be 100,000. That's 5% of the population dead, killed. You know, and I know no one wants to use the word genocide, but there's a court looking at whether this is a genocide or not. It looks pretty, you know, clear what it is. So, but we're leaving no stone unturned. The last 15 months, we've raised capital from the Palestinians in Palestine to strengthen the bank's ability to stay resilient. We've raised capital from the international development, multilateral and bilateral organizations, the who's who, the World Bank, IFC, the European Bank for Reconstruction Development, the US Development Finance Corporation, the Japanese Investment Corporation Agency, the Dutch, the French, AFD, Proparco, you name it. Everyone, Arab Fund in the GCC in Kuwait, we're talking to sovereign wealth funds in the Gulf. We've raised just in 15 months the same dollar amount of investment money. I know you're in the donor-driven humanitarian grant money business, but we're a company. We're a public shareholding company. We have shareholders. We should make every year $50 million of net profit. So we're a for-profit, right? But we've managed to raise almost the same dollar amount in the space of 15 months that we've, in terms of investment, $300 million just in the last 15 months. to support the bank's ability to sustain the shocks, but then moving forward to be ready to work with the world on recovering and rebuilding.
Thank you very much. Very clear points about being ready to be able to help as and when the moment is right. And in a way, that dynamic of the sort of chicken and egg, when is the situation right? But clearly the fact that you've been able to raise that amount of money, given your focus on Palestine itself as your main market, must be a sign of some ability of governments in the region to want to commit at that later turn. Which brings me, Sarah, I think quite conveniently to you, because I think we were discussing earlier before we started, having the right environment for reconstruction has to go well beyond questions of funding, well beyond even questions of humanitarian support. There's a broader infrastructure without which this is not going to succeed. And I'm setting aside all the politics here that Comfort mentioned in her remarks. But Sarah, tell us more from your perspective. What's going to be needed? I'm keeping an eye on time here. We're 7 minutes, maybe 8 minutes. We'll grab another minute or so away from the witching hour. Over to you.
No, you're absolutely right, Robin. Recovery and reconstruction in Gaza is not just a matter of money, it's not just a matter of infrastructure. In many ways, it is a problem of the devastation, the apocalyptic devastation that you describe. It's a problem of rubble removal, of burials, of disability, of trauma. And let me unpack a little bit each of them. I mean, colleagues, friends who work in Gaza describe Gaza today as a sort of moon landscape. These enormous craters, this devastation that is unfathomable, really. And in this devastation, there are what UNDP estimates 50 million tons of rubble to be removed. And this rubble is mixed with human remains and unexploded ordnance, which means it's incredibly difficult to deal with. There is an estimate that if you had 100 trucks working day in, day out, to try and remove this rubble with obviously what is required to make sure that you dispose and you bury the bodies that are really mixed with the rubble and carefully so that you don't detonate more of these UXOs. It will take 15 years to dispose of the rubble that's been created to date. And it's a problem of disabilities, I was saying. 30,000 people have been maimed. They have life-changing injuries, permanent disabilities, which also means a lot of rehabilitation, a lot of really trying to make sure that people can carry on life with a modicum of dignity going forward. And a lot of these are children. And that comes to the trauma. War Child, a British NGO, did a survey not long ago where, talking to children in Gaza, 96% felt that death was imminent for them. But more concerningly, 49% said that they wished they could die because they felt so hopeless, because they wanted to be reunited with their parents, their siblings, because they'd lost so much. And this is the reality of any reconstruction we want to talk about, is the wider sort of broken societal fabric and the trauma that, will endure. And there is the fact that we've been there before, quite frankly. We've been on a hamster wheel of Israeli-led destruction, internationally financed reconstruction, no political progress, rinse and repeat. And so we talk about money being put on the table by donors, but quite frankly, I am not sure that many people will want, many countries, many private investors even, will want to see the money used, to reconstruct whether infrastructure or, sort of rebuild other aspects of society, starting with education. Again, children can't wait for the schools to be rebuilt, to be brought together, to learn and hope again. But I don't think we'll see that investment because if there is not a credible pathway, towards political progress. And so for the time being, I feel that, what we're seeing in terms of this tented sort of reality in Gaza may be a feature that will stay with us unless we can seriously make progress on the political settlement, which will have to deal with the issue of justice for Palestinians, of accountability for war crimes. And Tom, as you say, it will only come if the public puts pressure on governments to make sure that we see this accountability, that we see this push for a just solution for Palestinians, both in Gaza and the West Bank, without which no stability in the region is possible.
And all those points taken, obviously, the rinse and repeat has another actor in there as well as the Israelis. Hamas has been part of the rinse and repeat as well. So I go back to the point that if Hamas comes back, it may be a form of stability that even the Netanyahu government might welcome for its own purposes, but it may nonetheless then contribute to that instability as it goes forward, given Hamas's approach to resistance.
Robin, that's why I think there are three phases.
Well, I was going to say, as we've got 2 minutes and you've got your three phases, you're going to go first. I was going to ask, hold on a sec. I'd like to go to each person. Hold on a sec. I want to go to each person. I want to give you a chance to say one last thing. This will be your last thing. But, you know, look, we can sit here and we will. And each of you have expressed extremely well the almost insurmountable mountains of problem that are going to have to be covered. But I want you to give me your best case. Your best case, I know your worst case. I want you to give me your best case for the next 3 months to 6 months. What is it you need? If you can't give me a best case, what would you need to get to a best case? Something of that sort, because we're trying to look forward here rather than, you know, there's a situation with Trump coming in where we've got to try to seize it somehow. So say whatever you want to say, Comfort, but give me your best case requirement at the end. And then I'm going to go in reverse. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, look, there are three phases, and the question...
You've only got a minute to 2 each.
There are three phases, and the most crucial part is that third phase, because it's about how you begin to give some reality to that Palestinian aspirations as well. Right. So I think it's crucial, you know, get over this 16 days. There are a number of questions of whether we can get there. But part of that political solution is about Palestinian succession, renewal, and then beginning to deal with the governance architecture that you need in Gaza. But, Robin, and I think this is something that we should never take off the table, the Israeli society itself is in a state of trauma as well, and they are part of the solution. You know, they haven't come out of that 7th of October mindset, and I think we need to recognise that that's going to be part of the getting through the phase 1, 2, and 3, and accompanying them as well. That's a piece of the jigsaw that we need to factor in.
And I'll editorialise by saying I think, you know, this is why there's going to be so much pressure on the Trump administration, which is supposed to be more tuned in to that. Whether it is or isn't is another matter, but it's meant to be. So this government, this administration, does have a moment to try and do what you just said there.
It's a guarantor.
They have a vision of the third phase, but they might have a vision of the first phase.
It's a guarantor, but does it have the enforcement capability
we will see.
To drive through the phases?
Very soon.
And that's the key.
Hashim.
I think this is not a humanitarian crisis or humanitarian situation. I think this is a situation of our collective humanity. I think our humanity is at stake here as a collective, making the world a better place. It's not just about economics, it's about fundamental human rights. And I think we all need to invest all our efforts and resources in protecting our fundamental humanity as a collective. And I know you said, you know, it's like, who would invest in Palestine right now? But you'll be surprised. That's why I think, and you said it, that's an astonishing number. $300 million of investment money in 15 months. That's crazy. So there is hope, because the world hasn't given up on Palestine. It wants to free Palestine, and it believes in the collective humanity and is willing to put serious amounts of, not this money that keeps, you know, going towards, you know, like you said, rebuild and then Israel blows it up and demolish. No, the world is wanting a decisive, you know, solution that ends this and ends up with justice and freedom for both, and that will unleash the immense potential that the entire region, not just Israel and Palestine, the immense potential, the entire region. You mentioned Trump, and I think he's been sort of ringing the sort of appetizer bell on that. I think we all know he was the mastermind of Abraham Accords 1.0, and he has 2.0 coming up. The big question is that in the context of a collective humanity?
Yep.
And can we really, truly unleash the potential of the entire region
Exactly.
in a sustainable way that is good for everyone, doesn't marginalize one people or strip the rights of one people versus another?
I mean, I think Trump might have both the short-term interest and the longer-term vision to try and go for that. We will see.
There is a win-win-win.
Can he sustain the discipline to do this? I will simply say, as a European, I hope that as Europeans we will step forward at this moment, having been relatively silent.
We have to. Europe has a historical obligation.
Exactly. So I think, you know, we're doing a lot of hope on what America should and shouldn't do. I hope Europeans will step forward at this moment and follow a lot of the advice each of you have been giving. Sarah, your last comment?
My advice is to center all of this in Palestinian voices and an agency, because, you know, around Palestine and the Middle East, you know, writ large, there is always a lot of external actors who have their solutions and their ideas and their prescriptions, and very, very rarely they take into account what Palestinians want, their aspirations, their vision, which is not the vision of Hamas or Fatah, quite frankly, but, you know, civil society, academics, businesses, diaspora. It needs to be centered in their vision and their agency.
Again, maybe Palestinians in the West Bank are going to have to play a very important role in stating that, given the situation in Gaza. Right, Tom, you've laid out your first thesis, you've heard all this stuff. It's probably coming back to you. I mean, not just on this panel, but...
well, welcome to a driverless world.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, immediately we've got to save 1 million lives. Palestinian kids are going to die of starvation and health. You know, that's the... Let's get that done first. Then, I really hope we can get those kids back to school. At the moment, with the Knesset legislation coming at us in a week and a half's time, that's not going to happen. So it's not just this generation, it's a future generation that is going to be in those hopeless conditions. You know, I hope, and I've been in Washington and elsewhere trying to think about how we make these arguments, I hope there is an argument that can be made to Trump that this is the thing that Biden and Obama and Clinton couldn't do. You know, this is your chance to get a great big gold medal.
He's going to love that, Tom.
And that's what he wants. And, you know...
he wants a grand deal.
Don't be a loser, be a winner. You know, we have to keep hoping that normalization with Palestinian dignity, security, justice, opportunity at the heart of it is possible. And we've got to keep hope, because that's our job collectively as humanity. And very finally, you know, I was in Damascus a couple of weeks ago, and things felt pretty hopeless there until recently. Maybe they'll be hopeless again. But I was given a poem by one woman who'd come to one of our centres to learn to read and write, and it talked about the grass growing back on the rubble. And, you know, the rubble is, you know, that's a really striking image, but, the grass is going to grow back eventually, and we've got to be there.
Yep. OK, look, I'm not going to editorialise any of this. You've heard 4, I thought, very thoughtful, impassioned sets of statements. It's a moment. Let's grasp the opportunity out of the horror, because otherwise the horror will have won, and we cannot let that happen. So thank you. Very strong hand for the panel, please. Thank you.